Hello, welcome to the Tech for Good podcast. We are very passionate about two things, technology and our world. In each pod, we will be interviewing some fascinating people, business leaders, but those with a special interest in solving the biggest issues facing humanity today. Think the environment, think healthcare provision during a pandemic, think global social injustice. If you want to know more about technology's immense potential to fix and transform, then you're in the right place. In this episode, I speak to Kristian Rönn. Kristian is CEO and co-founder of Normative, a company that has built software to help drive corporate sustainability. To achieve net zero, businesses are having to be more efficient and thorough in measuring their carbon impact. In the interview, Kristian talks about Normative's approach and how it ensures accuracy across a value chain, and he shares his own story encompassing philosophy, mathematics, and the battle against climate change. But first, I asked Kristian for his definition of carbon accounting.
That is a great question. I think the best way of answering it is to perhaps use normal financial accounting as an analogy. When you do financial accounting, you essentially look at the movement of money. I mean, money is the main unit of analysis, and you account for how money is moved between different accounts. That is aggregated up to a profit and loss statement. But the experience of the 20th and 21st century has been that just counting for money is painfully inadequate because it doesn't take externalities into account. I mean, essentially things such as climate change that affects our planet on a global scale is not taken into consideration. So that is how carbon accounting emerged. So what carbon accounting is essentially you track the kilos and tons of CO2 that is produced from the operations of a company, but also quite crucially in their value chain. And the standards for carbon accounting and the main standard called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol has existed for a bit more than 20 years. And when you talk about carbon emissions accounting, you typically divide things into three scopes. And I think an overview of those scopes can be useful for the rest of the conversation as well. If I throw out some terms, such as scope 1, 2, and 3. So scope 1 is essentially defined as the emissions from the operations of the company. So everything that is under the operational control of the company. So it could be the vehicle fleet. It could be if you're, for instance, an energy business, it might be burning of fossil fuels. If you're a farmer, it might be release of methane from your cattle, essentially burping and farting. So it is everything under your operational control. Scope 2 is indirect emissions from utilities. So it can be heating of offices, purchase of electricity, or other types of energy from a utilities provider. And scope 3 is all of the value chain based emissions that can be both upstream and downstream. So it can be purchased goods and services that you use to produce your product. It can be business travel, it can be transportation, it can even be investments in other companies. Let's say you're a bank and you lend money, or let's say you're an investor and you invest money in other projects. It's the emissions from that, the entire value chain upstream and downstream. So that is essentially what carbon is. It is calculating the emissions in your operations and inside of your value chain. But you ask what it is, but I quickly want to say also why I think it's incredibly important. I mean, right now, in order to avoid a global climate catastrophe, we need exponential climate action. It means that in order to stay below 1.5 degrees, we need to slash our emissions in half every single decade. And in order to do so, we need to bridge the so-called funding gap. So essentially, we need to move trillions from non-sustainable activities and companies to sustainable companies and activities. We need to shift like the entire world GDP from non-sustainable companies and activities to sustainable companies and activities. But in order to actually do so, we need to be able to track on a company level if they're doing good or if they're doing bad. We need a rigorous definition of what good looks like, and we need a rigorous way of tracking it. And right now, we are failing spectacularly in that regard. And that's why Normative exists. We try to our mission is to help our customers achieve net zero emissions, help to tackle the problem of involuntary greenwashing, which I can talk hours about, and we can talk more about that later. But I think it was important as well to answer the question like why is this crucial? So that is the kind of long answer to your question.
No, it's a brilliant introduction to the topic, Kristian, and you introduced Normative as well, your company there. Tell us a bit more about how you work with businesses.
So we take our businesses on a net zero journey. So what that means is that we want the companies that we work with in the end of the day to go net zero emissions by 2050. And that is not something that you might do from day one, right? I mean, some of our clients do it from day one, but the important thing here is the journey. And the way the journey looks like is that we, first of all, help our clients account for their full carbon footprint, both in their own operations, but more crucially, estimate the emissions in their value chain as well. Then we propose some concrete actions that they can take to reduce the emissions within their own operations first. That should always be the first priority because it's easier to control. I mean, you can switch to renewable electricity, you can upgrade your vehicle fleet. There's a bunch of things that you can do that are low-hanging fruits to decarbonize. But then after that, we help them engage their value chain. So that essentially means, can they take the right actions and work with their suppliers upstream or downstream to decarbonize. And of course, an important part of the journey as well is setting the right type of targets. And there we use the UN Race to Zero criteria as the main kind of compass of here is what an acceptable target looks like. I mean, we and it's a long journey. I mean, it's a journey that will last for 10, 20, maybe 30 years. So we work with them on an ongoing basis and try to move them in the right direction.
Yeah. I imagine, Kristian, that it's a big challenge to accurately measure a company's carbon footprint, and when you think about the value chain as well, to deliver an accurate picture there as well, I imagine it's challenging. Well, how are you doing that? What is the technology that is helping you deliver both that and the accuracy that you need as well?
That is a great question. In our experience, the main source of inaccuracy in carbon accounting is first of all the scoping. So essentially what we see is that the carbon accounts between different companies are not comparable at all. It's a little bit, like handing in your profit and loss statement on a napkin. It is not comparable, it is not standardized. And the main problem is scoping. And what I mean by that is that some legal companies decide that we're going to start by just accounting for some emissions in our operations. We might account for electricity or our vehicles. Some might go a little bit further and say, okay, let's add transportation as well. But in order to scope, properly, you actually need to include everything. So the way we assure that things are properly scoped is that we say, if it is a cost in your profit and loss statement, then it should be accounted for. Like it doesn't matter if you bought it from an external supplier. It should be all of your electricity bills. It should be purchase of raw materials, transportation, like everything that you have paid for. We need to estimate that. So we start with the so-called spend-based analysis, and how it works is that our clients, they take data from their ERP systems and accounting systems and upload that into Normative. And then we can analyze every single invoice and estimate the emissions that they have. And then that is called a so-called hotspot analysis. So that with that type of analysis, they will see what are the largest sources of our emissions, what are the largest suppliers, and what are the largest categories. Is it business travel? It almost never is, right? But then we can tell them, okay, it's this category that you need to work with. Then we will ask some follow-up questions in order to get more accurate data. I mean, for instance, just by looking at the spend of electricity, you might not know, is this a renewable or non-renewable electricity contract? We might not know the exact number of kilowatt hours. So then we ask that kind of follow-up question, is this renewable or non-renewable electricity? What is the exact number of kilowatt hours? So that way we can improve the accuracy of the calculations. But I think finally, on the value chain, it is important to engage them and get accurate data from them as well. And that is sometimes hard work, because most of the companies in your value chain will have no clue what their carbon emissions are, and that's why it's important to have the kind of carbon accounting infrastructure that we have developed that is easy to use, so we can actually when our clients tell their value chain, you need to account for this, they actually have a solution as well. I mean, you can account for this, and here is the tool for you to do so, and it's actually not that complicated. So that is like a rather long answer to a rather complex issue.
Yeah. And now I know, Kristian, that many people I think are intimidated by the challenge that we face when it comes to this issue, carbon reduction, the future of our planet ultimately. Can you offer the listeners some encouragement about, some of the work you're doing with your clients right now, like what scale are you operating at, and also talk about the work you're doing with the United Nations as well?
Yeah. So we work together with the partners of the UN Race to Zero campaign, which is a part of the UNFCCC. So we work, for instance, with the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, which is a part of the UN Race to Zero campaign. We also started something called the SME Climate Hub, which is geared towards smaller businesses, together with the Weaving Business Coalition and the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And the work we try to do there is, first of all, we want to standardize how carbon accounting is done. We want to standardize what is the definition of net zero emissions. And we want to encode those standards into software in the same way that that financial accounting has been encoded into software. I mean, you don't use manual sheets anymore. You use highly automatic accounting solutions that just feeds data from your banking system or your other types of ERP, invoicing, procurement systems in order to produce your P&L. And I think that is what is needed ultimately, to encode standards and principles into software to really have comparability in order to have apples to apples comparisons between businesses. And just for a frame of reference, like SME Climate Hub that we started with the Weaving Business Coalition and Exponential Roadmap Initiative, so far we have 4,000 small and medium-sized enterprises that have committed to net zero emissions over the past year. And that is almost half of all companies on the entire planet that took a net zero target. So I think the work that we're doing together with our partners are really having an impact, like to the extent that it's actually the major source for companies to publicly commit to a net zero target.
Hi, I'm Daniel Brigham, editor of the Tech for Good magazine. I hope you're enjoying this pod, and if you want more, why not head over to techforgood.net for some amazing and thought-provoking stories. You can read about one company's mission to use digital technologies in the fight against HIV, or learn how social media can help refugees take control of their narratives. For those insights and more, read and subscribe at techforgood.net.
I want to learn a bit more about you. I think you have to be a special kind of personality, Kristian, to want to make it your mission in life to try and solve one of our biggest challenges. When did you first become interested in this idea of carbon accounting, tackling this challenge? Like, can you remember when you sort of first thought, I'm going to make this my mission?
I think it started very early. So I think the red thread, if you want to find one in my life, is that I have as a mission to try to live my life with full intentionality. And to me, that means living my life according to my values and being very explicit on what my values are. So at age 6, 7, I decided to become a vegetarian, for instance, when I kind of realized that we had this like petting zoo close to where I lived, on the countryside of Sweden, and kind of making that connection that the same animals like pigs or goats or whatever that I was petting as a child was the same animals that I then later ate and that got slaughtered. That created a disconnect, and I think that disconnect of not living to my values created a lot of cognitive dissonance to me, which is incredibly uncomfortable. And later, a few years later, when we got an internet connection, I got obsessed on philosophy. So I started to read like everything on Wikipedia or forums on philosophy. And I discovered a philosopher called Jeremy Bentham. He's essentially 17th, 18th century philosopher that invented something called utilitarianism. And what he said is, okay, the purpose of societies and the purpose of life is to create as much happiness and well-being as possible. That is the only thing that matters. So I got a little bit obsessed with that idea. Like, I mean, is this something that you can actually account for? Like, what would it be possible to account for the total, well-being on society? And then, of course, everything that affects well-being. And I quickly came to the conclusion that the biggest threat to global well-being are global catastrophic risks and extinction events, because then you do not only kill everyone on planet Earth today, all animals, all humans, but you also kill everyone that might live on planet Earth for the next, billion years that the Earth will exist. So that's like a humongous catastrophe, and especially if you think about the fact that we might be alone in the entire galaxy and universe. It's it is the biggest catastrophe. So if I could just prevent that type of extinction events, with 0.001 probability or whatever, that would still be a worthwhile thing to do, mathematically speaking. So that became a little bit of my life mission. I found a couple of friends, like a bit more than a decade ago, that had the same kind of view and philosophy. and that later led to something called the effective altruism movement, which has been like a big kind of inspiration of mine. So I think that explains a little bit, my background and sentiment. Academically speaking, I'm a philosopher and mathematician. So I think climate change, talking about global catastrophes, is the most pressing one right now. It's also one of the catastrophes where the world is starting to mobilize. So now we just need, the right metrics and the right accounting for capital to be allocated to, from non-sustainable activities and companies to sustainable companies and activities. So that is, a little bit about, my history from kind of a philosophical point of view, and why I started this business in the first place.
Yeah, fascinating story, Kristian. Tell us a bit about your time here in the UK and your work and research at Oxford University.
Yeah, so I think that is a part of the journey. So the reason why I actually moved to Oxford is because a friend of mine, Rob Wiblin and Will McAskill and a few others, started this new organization called the Center for Effective Altruism, which, the kind of core principles in the effective altruism movement is to try and essentially create as much impact as possible given the resources that you have. So I actually moved in order to work for that organization initially. But then there was also this research institute at the University of Oxford called the Future of Humanity Institute, that is, and that institute is still around and doing really, really good research. And it's concerned around having an academic rigorous approach of analyzing global catastrophic risks and existential risks. Essentially, what things can happen for humanity and life to go extinct, and how do we prevent it? So when I was there in Oxford working for Center for Effective Altruism, I got this job offer to start to work for the Future of Humanity Institute, and I had admired their research for a really long time, and I worked as a project manager there. So it meant that I was acting as an amplifier to the rest of the researchers, applying for grants in order to make sure that our research projects got off the ground. I also helped to kind of both with the grant making and helped another guy, Hugh Price and Martin Rees and John Tallinn and Sean set up a similar research institute at the University of Cambridge called the Center for the Study of Existential Risk. So, I mean, I mostly did kind of admin to amplify everyone else to do their good research. But with that said, I mean, my background was in philosophy and mathematics, same as everyone else. So I was very much like a part of the discussions and trying to give feedback and input to what everyone else was doing.
Kristian, this is clearly a topic that you take incredibly seriously with your business now, Normative, as we've said. You're addressing this with businesses. Are business leaders, do you think, taking this issue seriously enough right now, in your opinion?
Of course, they're not taking it seriously enough. Then we wouldn't have a problem if everyone took it seriously enough. But I think things are starting to change. We're starting to see some serious commitments towards net zero. But I think there is a high chance for involuntary greenwashing. I think we're seeing a lot of good intentions right now. But the problem is that there is a lack of knowledge on how to properly account for your emissions, which kind of damages the credibility of the net zero targets. So for instance, just a few days ago, you could read in BBC and a few other places. So there was this analysis of 25 large corporates and their net zero targets, and how most of them Actually, I think everyone except for one was overstated. And what that means essentially is that they said they would go net zero, but they didn't fully take their scope 3 emissions, their value chain based emissions into account, which doesn't make the net zero target credible. And I think this is not due to any malicious intent. I think it's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of standardization. And what you see a lot as well is that businesses think they can go towards net zero by investing in carbon offsets. So essentially, planting trees or paying to preserve patches of forests. And there's plenty of research that shows that 85 to 90% of those projects actually don't reduce emissions at all. And again, this is something that most businesses are not aware of. They think they're doing the right thing, and they think that there's this easy solution for them to avoid their emissions by just planting trees, which is not true. So I think for us, it's really important to be a trusted advisor in order for companies to avoid involuntary greenwashing, because I think none of them actually want to do greenwashing. It damages their reputation. So I think companies, to summarize your question, the answer to your question, I think companies are not doing enough, but I think I see a shift. I see a lot of companies trying to do the right thing, but they need partners that can help them on that journey in order to avoid potential involuntary greenwashing.
So on a final point, Kristian, what do you see as the way forward? Because it sounds like from what you're saying there, that education is still a big part of it as well. People, with involuntary greenwashing don't necessarily know that they're doing it. Obviously, that's the definition of it. And then the technology piece, the partnerships, as you said there. Do you see all of that eventually kind of coming together in a really positive way?
Yeah, I think so. I think the way forward is greater standardization. So you essentially need the same rigor of carbon accounts as your profit and loss statement. And I think the way forward is more and more investors starting to incorporate that climate risk into their overall risk calculus. The way I see it, there is an implicit cost of carbon in the P&L, profit and loss statements of all businesses on the planet. And everyone is clueless of what that cost is, but it is there and it is real. And there's just a matter of time as, the price that you pay today for carbon will converge towards the social cost of carbon. The price that the world is paying through droughts, to floods, through hurricanes and forest fires and so on. So that real price will eventually come, and then everyone will stand there with a enormous liability in their profit and loss statements that are not properly accounted for. So I think the way forward is to have the right standardization and accounting procedures, but also for the financial industry to take that carbon accounting seriously in their investment decisions, and also for large companies to take it seriously in terms of deciding, what companies and partners in my value chain should I work with and not work with. So I think we're in the right direction, and I'm quite hopeful that we will be able to do a lot of good things going forward, and hopefully stay below 1.5 degrees.
That was the Tech for Good podcast. Listen, subscribe, and rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Stitcher.